Remember, that news broke not too long ago. That was right after the start of the Republican National Convention. This afternoon, delegates made Trump's presidential nomination official with their roll call of states. The former president, now in Milwaukee, says he rewrote his convention speech in light of the shooting at his Pennsylvania rally.
They tried to assassinate him, and he's still coming back fighting. So I think the Republicans are behind him 150% now.
House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer of Kentucky will hold a hearing next Monday to examine the U.S. Secret Service's response to the attempted assassination of Trump. The hearing will take place at 10 a.m. and will feature testimony from Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle. The hearing will be open to the public and live streamed online at oversight.house.gov.
Some lawmakers from Kentucky serving in the nation's capital say the attempted assassination of former President Trump is the result of a very heated campaign and possible holes in the Secret Service plan before the campaign event.
Now, a lot of discussion and action is expected in the wake of the shooting that killed a spectator at the event in Pennsylvania. WKYT's Phil Pendleton has some reaction. It's our top story at 6.
Watching it on television live as it was happening.
And was terrified. It looked like at the first blush that he had been hit severely.
We were watching the speech and we were horrified by it. I've been under gunfire myself. I was there at the ball field in 2017 when Steve Scalise was almost killed by gunfire.
Both Senator Paul and Congressman Rogers say the shooting at Trump's rally happened in a campaign that has been defined by its rhetoric.
And the rhetoric has become so hot that I'm afraid that maybe some of what I'll call weak-minded people might take the rhetoric literally.
The fact that he's saying all of the time that somehow President Trump is a threat to democracy, as I said in my remarks, the Soviet Union was a threat to democracy. Hitler was a threat to democracy.
But Paul and Rogers say they believe there needs to be a thorough investigation into the Secret Service and overall security plan.
Yeah, I think it's time that we reviewed their preparation. And our Kentucky colleague, Jamie Comer, chairman of the Oversight Committee in the House, already is beginning to hold hearings.
There was a letdown somewhere. Whoever was overall in charge of the operation should have never left that building.
Paul says there needs to be consequences for the actions at the rally. In Pulaski County, Phil Pendleton, WKYT.
Congressman Rogers says the most glaring problem is ignoring a man with a rifle on top of the building where the shots were fired.